Hello YouTubers, it's Silvertardis here, and welcome to my next Doctor Who review. And this week I'm looking at Into the Dalek, the second episode of Doctor Who Series 8. I apologise for this being a little late, but at least you're not waiting a week after it aired this time. Yes, but straight off the bat, before this episode aired, I thought it was too early to bring the Daleks back for another battle with the Doctor, because they appeared not only in the 50th anniversary special, which I didn't mind because it's the anniversary special, you have to have the Daleks in there, but they also appeared in Time of the Doctor, Matt Smith's final story, and there's this thing with the Daleks. The BBC don't own them, they're owned by the Terry Nation estate, Terry Nation being the guy who came up with this awesome Doctor Who villain, is that they have to use the Daleks once every year, the BBC, otherwise they lose the rights to them. And if that happens, the Terry Nation estate can charge them a huge amount of money to have the rights to the Daleks back again. So the Daleks, it's very difficult to handle them right these days, because there never used to be that handicap with them in the classic series. Granted, some Doctors have faced the Daleks quite early on in their tenure before. I mean, in Patrick Troughton's case, in Power of the Daleks, that was because he was the first regeneration ever, the first time it happened. The crew needed to bring the Daleks back in to convince people this was still Doctor Who, despite the radical change to the main character. And granted, it has happened in Matt Smith's era too. They turned up in Victory of the Daleks, which I think was also too early. And there was the first ever Dalek story, which I guess I can overlook because it introduced us to these monsters in the first place. But not only was this too early to introduce the Daleks, I think it was too early to ask the big question the episode had running through it: is this new Doctor a good man? Looking at this story, I think it would have worked a lot better as, say, episode 6 or 7 at least this series, because the question, am I a good man? We don't have enough knowledge about this version of the Doctor to answer that question yet. And Clara herself says, I don't know. But of course she doesn't know. She's only known this Doctor for one story. And let's talk about Jenna Coleman as Clara. I like the fact that they're finally giving her some more in the way of character development, although there is one scene which irks me a bit, and that's when they fix the Dalek, it suddenly turns bad again, and she's cross with the Doctor because deep down he's just a little bit happy that he was right about the Daleks not turning over a new leaf. But the thing is, he's still right, and yet Clara has a right old go at him, and if she was going to have a go at him about anything, then surely it would be not bothering to save a certain soldier as they made their way into the Dalek, but I'll get onto that later. This story also introduced us to the new companion, Danny Pink, played by Samuel Anderson, and I'm getting some good first impressions. I mean, he's certainly developed a lot quicker than Rory did in Series 5, and I'm praying that he's going to be more than just a love interest for Clara, because straight from the off they've given him a backstory about being a soldier, although when that boy asks in the classroom, "Sir, have you ever killed a man?" where the hell did that come from? Okay, maybe one or two of them did hear that he was a soldier, but just asking that question out loud in class, out of nowhere, that just felt pretty disjointed. And Samuel Anderson, he nails the dialogue pretty well, and the physical comedy, specifically the head banging sequence, was funny. But I think it was a mistake to introduce him in this story, and by that I mean I'm okay with him being introduced at this point in the series, but in this particular story, all he seemed to do was distract us from the main narrative, which should of course be focused on the Daleks. So what I would have preferred is that if they'd had a different story as episode 2 and introduced Samuel Anderson in that and actually have him join the TARDIS, it would be less of an issue for me. But let's go ahead and talk about the direction. And my God, am I impressed with this week's episode. It's directed by Ben Wheatley, who directed Deep Breath the previous week. And he did a good job there, but this is where we're starting to see his full potential. I mean, like, when they enter through the Dalek eye stalk, there was that rather trippy sequence. And the lighting, I think, is one of the most impressive things here, whether it's in the TARDIS, inside various parts of the Dalek, or on board the Aristotle, like when the Daleks are first coming on board. Gives me a nice deja vu of Resurrection of the Daleks when they burst through the airlock. But I've got to stress this now. Who is controlling these Daleks these days? Because whoever it is, they seem to have taken a step back. I mean, just look at this next picture coming up here when the Daleks first come on board the Aristotle. Why are they drunkenly gazing at the ceiling? And when they talk, they don't even bother to make the lights flash in time with their speech. So all I'm saying is the Dalek operators have really got to get their act together next time. But on the premise, I really like the fact that the Daleks are on a much smaller scale story, and rather than going on one of these ridiculous universe-conquering grand schemes like in Journey's End or various other stories I could mention. The Daleks in this story are following more of a classic Dalek story format, whereas they're fighting humans on small-scale battlefields, which is a nice throwback to the Dalek war stories, mainly during the tenures of the first 3 Doctors. And I also got a nice vibe when Rusty, the damaged Dalek, when he shouted "Death to the Daleks," when he saw the Doctor's hatred in his mind. Yes, when he shouted "Death to the Daleks," I think that was meant to be a nice nod to the Big Finish audio series Dalek Empire. Seriously, you should go and listen to that because it is epic. And the advantage of having an enemy as powerful as the Daleks fighting on a much smaller scale for a difference actually shows off their scale quite well. Why? Because there's a body count. Seriously, the last time the Daleks actually exterminated someone was in Victory of the Daleks, which was a good 4 years ago. The body count makes them a greater threat, and it also allows us to see how soldiers and civilians are affected by the war against these Daleks. Of course, the best example being Zoe Ashton as Journey Blue, and for such a what should be a one-note character, she does a fantastic job, I think, and she feels towards the Doctor exactly the same way I think most of the audience members feel. For a start, Journey has to put up with her brother being killed by the Daleks, and more to the point, the Doctor managing to save her but not him. But on top of that, she has to cope with that soldier, I think his name was Ross, getting disintegrated and turned into protein, and the Doctor not seeming to care about it. And when they finally do get the Dalek fixed, they find out it was all for nothing. And she also has to put up with losing Gretchen Alison Carlyle, played by Laura dos Santos, who I'll get on to in a minute. I'm thinking, why have her when we could have had Danny, who's got this soldier backstory as well? But I think that the BBC are just hanging some sort of hint in front of us that the Doctor's going to need soldiers on his side later on in the series. But what I don't get is why Journey asks the Doctor to take her with him at the end. I understand she's meant to be showing up later on this series, but I still don't get why she wants to go with him after he was such a callous git towards her for most of the story. Now let's talk about Gretchen. Sorry for the lack of a picture, but yes, as you saw in that story, she was disintegrated by one of the antibodies and then finds herself in heaven at some sort of tea party. Am I the only one who found that scene incredibly out of place? Yeah, I get the fact that characters are going to be dying throughout this series and ending up in heaven with Missy, but I think it would have worked better at the end of the episode with Gretchen just waking up there instead of right in the middle of the action. We go from a serious space battle to a tea party and then back to space battle again. It just doesn't fit. And the last supporting character I can talk about is Colonel Morgan Blue, played by Michael Smiley. Now, I think he was very underused in this story, because Michael Smiley is one hell of a talented actor, and I think it would have been better if he'd actually gone into the Dalek with the other soldiers. But he does play his part spot on, aka a serious battle strategist who can go from thanking someone for saving one of his recruits to ordering him to be shot, bagged, and thrown out into space at the drop of a hat. And again, that just emphasises how big a threat the Daleks are and how important the battle plans to stop them are. Hence, he can't trust anyone for fear of them being a duplicate. Although I'm thankful they didn't show up in this story. But finally, on to Peter Capaldi as the Doctor. We're only 2 episodes into Series 8, and my god, am I impressed thus far. Scenes I could mention. There's his first scene, obviously, where he's just saved Journey from the jaws of death, and he's waiting for her to say please before he takes her home, despite the fact that she's pointing a gun at his head. And what makes it all the more casual from his perspective, he's holding 2 cups of coffee. And another mentionable moment is where he's face to face with the Dalek mutant, and connects with its mind. And he shows it the beauty and divinity of the universe, and then accidentally his hatred of the Daleks. And I thought that was brilliant. And again, this emphasises just how evil and threatening the Daleks are. They're so evil and threatening that the Doctor's hatred for them drowns out everything good and beautiful about the universe, and that just turns the Dalek into a homicidal killing machine once again. Yes, he got the Dalek back on his own side, but he didn't make it a really good Dalek like he was hoping for. Whilst that moment was brilliant, by far and away the most shocking part of this story was the death of Ross, when the Doctor throws him that pill, which did something, I'm not exactly sure what, but we're so convinced that he's going to get that soldier out of there. The soldier trusts him, and he ends up being vaporised and turned into this protein soup. And the Doctor's excuse was he's dead already. There was nothing I could do. That I could just about cope with. But when they're actually in the protein tank and he goes, yes, Ross is the top layer if you want to say a few words. I can't remember the last time the Doctor was that callous. And I know we've been told we're in for a darker Doctor. I just didn't realise how dark. I think this is the darkest the Doctor has ever been. Not even the War Doctor was that dark. I keep saying dark. But yeah, definite similarities in behaviour to the Seventh Doctor, being his dark, mysterious and cunning self, moving the pieces on the board, but without really telling anyone anything. But I think an even better comparison than that, for Peter Capaldi's Doctor, is the meddling monk. Now, I'm sure quite a lot of the new series fans won't know who the hell I'm talking about. The meddling monk appeared way back in William Hartnell's era. This was even before the Master showed up, but he follows a similar sort of idea. The monk is a Time Lord, like the Doctor, like the Master, and we first see him in the Time Meddler. As far as the TV series is concerned, he's only appeared in William Hartnell's era, and throughout that he was played by Peter Butterworth. But a few years ago, Big Finish brought him back to feature in audios like The Book of Kells, Resurrection of Mars, and To the Death. And he was played by Graham Garden in those. But what I'm trying to say about the monk, he's the very much a fighter for good, like the Doctor. But for a start, he's not nearly as experienced as the Doctor, and more to the point, he doesn't obey the laws of time the way the Doctor does. I mean, in William Hartnell's era, he wouldn't even break one rule. But come the classic series, and you eventually end up going back to Gallifrey and changing time then and there. Yes, the monk, I like to think of him as a sort of foreshadow for the more modern Doctors, who are actually prepared to break a few rules here and there for what they think is the greater good. And the monk, like Capaldi's Doctor in this story, he's not too bothered about people getting killed in the line of fire, so long as he manages to get the more important job, the overall task, finished. Yeah, so Capaldi's Doctor in this story did go to quite tragic lengths to try and get the Dalek to be a good Dalek, but ultimately in the end he didn't succeed, which was the real kicker. But I imagine one, let's say, half good Dalek will eventually lead to something in the way of a sequel to this. It definitely, I would say it did something original. Going inside the Daleks certainly was, even if it did resemble Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS from last series a bit too much. There were also parallels to the Dalek story from Christopher Eccleston's era, not least the Dalek being chained up and turning somewhat good by the end. But also the idea of a good Dalek, that's not exactly new. I mean, for goodness sake, Patrick Troughton's Doctor in Evil of the Daleks end up playing a game of trains with 3 Daleks injected with the human factor. Yes, I mean, the fact that they're actually infant Daleks and still have to grow up is worth noting, but still, the idea of the Doctor thinking there's no such thing as a good Dalek, that's rubbish. Oh, and one thing we didn't need right at the end was the Dalek saying, "You are a good Dalek." I mean, for a start, that's ripped straight out of the Christopher Eccleston Dalek story from Series 1, and it was said so much better there. But I think it should have just been the Doctor and the Dalek looking at each other, not saying anything, then followed by what I think is the best bit of Dalek body language ever. I mean, when the Dalek turns its body around but keeps its eye fixed firmly on the Doctor, as if to say, think about what I just said. Then it turns its head around and moves off. That was a great bit of Dalek body language. But my final thoughts on the story, like I said, far too early to bring up the whole "am I a good man" concept, and certainly far too early to bring the Daleks back. And Danny Pink in this, I don't think this was a good point to introduce him. So, overall score for the episode? 8 out of 10. So, slightly better than Deep Breath, but I think it's the best story centred around the Daleks that we've had for a while. I mean, Day of the Doctor doesn't count, and it blows Asylum of the Daleks out of the water completely. But let's hope the Daleks get a nice long rest till next year, and I'll be back soon to talk about episode 3 of Series 8, Robots of Sherwood by Mark Gatiss. See you then.